Alright guys, what is up? It is Joseph here, back again for another NFL video. And as all of you know, the NFL Top 100 Players of 2020 has been released recently. And today I just wanted to go over some of my thoughts on the list. And starting out with just from 100 to 91. So I guess I'm just going to go all the way from 100 eventually to number 1. And just give you my thoughts and analysis on the players and who I think should go where and what do I think of the rankings and so on. So let's get right into it. Starting out in spot number 100, we have Lavonte David. This man is always underrated every year. I mean, not just on the NFL Top 100 lists, but he's always just consistent. He had like 140 tackles this year, had an interception, made a lot of plays. Has obviously been the leader of this Bucs team in defense for years now, and is consistently underrated. And that's probably because he plays for the Bucs. You know, they're usually pretty terrible. This year was kind of the same again for them. They had struggles. But their defense made some plays. They had some improvements. Adding Devin White to that defense helped a lot. But Lavonte David, again, carried the load for the most part for the Bucs. And, well, he's just consistently underrated. And, when your team loses a lot, you're not too popular usually. And that's just the way it's been for Lavonte David. So he ends up in spot 100. But I think he is much more deserving of being 100. And he should be a lot higher. So, yeah, unfortunate for him. Next up, at spot number 99, we have Darren Waller, who's a guy who really came out of the nowhere. You know, he was kind of a sleeper and kind of an under-the-radar type player going into 2019, and he just really went sky high with the season. I mean, he had like 1,300 yards. He only had like 3 touchdowns, but he also had like just a really solid season, you know? I mean, a breakout season. He got spot number 99, and, you know, he was one of the best tight ends in the NFL, probably top 3 behind Kelce and Kittle. And he ends up with spot number 99, so, I mean, I know it's his first year on the list, and he just had a breakout year, but I feel like he should be a little higher, you know? I mean, he had such a great year. I think I said he had like 1,300 yards. I think he actually only had 1,100. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Overall, though, he had a pretty solid season for a Raiders team that really just didn't have a remarkable season at all. But if anyone was a bright spot on that offense, it was Darren Waller. He made plays consistently, was a great catch and run threat, and I guess he looks to improve next year. He should be higher on this list this year, and he's probably going to be higher next year. But what a year for Darren Waller. And, he impressed, and I think he's going to continue to do it throughout the future. Next up at spot number 98, we have Brandon Brooks. Pretty solid guy for the Eagles. Been there a few years. Also played for the Texans in the past. Started all 16 games. Played relatively well. You know, I mean, he gets spot number 98, which I think is the first player on this list that's in a fair spot. I mean, how he's above Darren Waller is beyond me, because don't get me wrong, he's a good player, and he's made a lot of, he's been good for the run and pass block the past few years, including this year, but he's not necessarily a special player or anyone who's really franchise-changing or really just had such a successful year like Darren Waller did. He made the Pro Bowl, but then again, anyone can make the Pro Bowl, it seems, especially with people dropping out all the time. But he had a solid year. He was healthy. Unfortunately, I think he actually recently tore his Achilles or his ACL or something like that, which is a shame, so I hope he can heal and recover from that. But he had a solid year. I mean, I don't really have too much to say for him. He's a guard. He did his job, and what more can you ask of him? So I think 98 is a fair spot for him. Maybe a little higher would be better for him, but he's been consistent, and it's unfortunate what happened to him this offseason, but solid year for Brandon Brooks. Next up, after Brandon Brooks, spot number 97, we have Budda Baker of the Arizona Cardinals. He's a guy who's really been kind of an anchor on that Cardinals defense the past 2 years or so. This year, I think he had like almost 150 total tackles. And he's just in the trenches, stopping the run. He's never really been, in my opinion, like an excellent or elite pass defender. But he gets by, he makes plays, he's a playmaker, he's an athlete. And you can tell, He gets spot number 97, which, I don't know, I feel like he should be a little higher, but I feel like every year, everyone feels like every player should be higher. Every player feels too low. There's rarely, in my opinion, players in the top 100 list. When you look at the list and you're like, oh, that guy, he's too high. I mean, that happens sometimes, but I feel like for most players, when you look at the top 100 list, most people are always like, oh, he's too low. And I think that can be the case for Budda Baker. But I don't think 97 is a bad spot for him. I mean, if I were to move him up, maybe it'd be in the 80s, but I don't think he'd be beyond that. But he had a pretty solid year. He's a guy who gets a lot of tackles, and tackles aren't everything, but when you're in the trenches, you're making a difference. Someone's got to make a tackle, someone's got to stop the run, and the run's very important. And, if you can't stop a team from running, you're going to get beat. I mean, the run is very successful, and teams can pass a lot, but that doesn't always lead to victory. But when a team runs the ball well, usually they win, and Budda Baker is very excellent stopping the run and is decent in pass coverage as well. So another solid year from him. Next up, after Budda Baker at spot number 96, we have Carson of the Seattle Seahawks. I think 96 isn't a bad spot for him, but again, he's a guy that I think would be much better suited, I guess, in the 80s, maybe low 80s, high 80s, just anywhere in the 80s, I guess you could say. Got a new career high in rushing yards. He had 7 rushing touchdowns, I think, which is still pretty solid. He played relatively well. I mean, he's had some fumbling issues in his career, but again, he's pretty solid. He's a bruiser. And, he makes a lot of plays for the Seahawks and has been running the ball relatively well for them. So a solid year from him. Honestly, I don't really have too much else to say about him. Again, I think he can improve in the pass game, but as always. But, he's good at what he does best, run the ball. And that's really what I feel like all you need to ask for him in the Seahawks offense when they have so many good playmakers at wide receiver like Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And you have Russell Wilson too. So solid year from Carson. I feel like maybe he should be a little higher as well, but I don't think 96 really is a bad spot for him. But I'm sure Seahawks fans don't like it at all. So, yeah. Next up at spot number 95, we have Frank Clark of the Kansas City Chiefs. He had a really excellent year with the Seahawks a couple years back where he had like 14 sacks. And then obviously he went to the Chiefs. Had 8 sacks, had like 40 total tackles, so he really declined. And, the Chiefs had a lot of good players in that defense, guys like Chris Jones, who would gobble up sacks. So for him, compared to Seattle, Kansas City is much more crowded and star power, and they ended up winning the Super Bowl. So really, regardless of how he played, they're the champs, and you can't dispute that. So I guess you could say it a down year, but ultimately he did his job, and he rushed the QB, and he still managed to get 8 sacks. And, he's not necessarily a special player, in my opinion, or someone who's really franchise-changing, but he definitely can make some plays when you need him to, and he's a guy who's solid and consistent and just continues to improve. And, I think he's going to do better next year. I mean, his first year in Kansas City wasn't bad. Did he put up the Seattle-type numbers? No, but they won the Super Bowl, and, when you win the Super Bowl, what more can you ask of your players? And I think he did pretty solid. As far as his spot on the list, I think where he's at, again, I don't know. I just feel like every player is always too low, but for him, 96? I forgot. 95, 96. It's a good spot for him. I'm fine with that. Again, maybe a pinch higher, but pretty solid season from Frank Clark. Next up, after Frank Clark, we have another lineman in Jason Kelce of the Philadelphia Eagles, who ends up at spot number 94 on the list. Kelce's been a consistent and very hardworking member of that Eagles team. He always shows up. He always makes plays for the offense and helps them move along the pass game and run game. And he was a first-team All-Pro this year, started all 16 games. He's just solid, He's a good guy, great veteran center, brother of Travis Kelce, if that means anything. And he just gets the job done, It's what he does. And, 94, I know I was already saying, again, whatever spot the next player is going to be is always too low. But seriously, for Jason Kelce, now he's, to me, a guy that's much more underrated and really should be higher on this list. I'd love to see Carson and Frank Clark go up maybe to the 80s, but I think Jason Kelce could, get up to the 70s, 60s, 50s, maybe even 40s. I mean, he's a first-team All-Pro, and he's solid, consistent every year. I know it's just you base it off of the 2019 season, but, even then, if you just based off the season, he was a first-team All-Pro, started all games. He's great. He's a great player, great veteran, great teammate, he's a captain. And he's just always been there. And, he's underrated. And unfortunately for most linemen in the league, they just don't get the respect and fame that they should have, they deserve. And I feel like that is what hurts Jason Kelce. And not only that, but the Eagles didn't have the greatest season, so I feel like that also hurts his case here when he comes to spot number 94. But another solid year from Kelce, and I expect him to do well again next year. Next up, we have a guy who, in my opinion, unlike Kelce, is a little bit more of a justified spot at number 93, Allen Robinson of Chicago Bears. Now, part of me thinks that he should be higher because he was kind of the sole WR1 and really big offensive threat for the Bears when that offense just struggled terribly at times. He was the only consistent guy out there who would make plays, and he didn't have a good game every game, but he was consistent enough where he had over 1,000 yards for the first time since he had that huge breakout year in 2015 with the Jags, and he looked like he was playing well, and he was. And the Bears needed a receiver to do that, and that was him. He stepped to the plate. Unfortunately for the rest of the Bears offense, that wasn't the case. But, because of him stepping up and being kind of the sole guy on that Bears offense who was more consistent and really showed up more this year compared to some other guys, I got to respect him there. And not only that, but he's just a good player. So part of me wants to have him go higher, but at the same time, I think his spot is justified. But, if he can just continue to work back from his injury and get back to that 2015 form, he's just going to keep going up. And, a lot of respect for Allen Robinson. A solid season from him. We'll see how things go next year with the Bears and Matt Trubisky and Nick Foles. So who knows what's going to happen. But solid season from Robinson. After Robinson, we have a guy in Darius Slay that finished up 2019 with another solid season. Very consistent player. You know what he's going to get. Very good cornerback. He had a couple of picks this year. He played solid. Unfortunately, though, for him, he plays for the Lions, so nobody really cares about the Lions. So he doesn't get the fame he might deserve. He had another fine year, though. Now he's playing for the Eagles, but I think he's going to help them out a lot. But I think his 92 spot is fair. He didn't have a huge year like he's had in the past, but he had a solid year, and he's been consistent. And as a Lions fan, I guess maybe now Eagles fan, what more can you ask for from him? Like other guys, maybe he could be a little higher, maybe in the 80s, 70s, but I think 92 is fair for him. I think that's a good spot for him. So props to Darius Slay for making the list. Now, after Darius Slay, we have the last player of today's video being in spot number 91, Grady Jarrett. Now, there are a lot of good linemen out there, and I've already talked about some guys that I think really should be higher, like Jason Kelce. And Grady Jarrett's another one of those guys. He's been consistent the past few years, and this year he had a career year. He was great. He was good in tackles for loss, pressures, sacks, hit career high in sacks, I believe. Was a great run defender. The Falcons, again, struggled this year at times, but, he was kind of, at times, the one bright light on that defense, and they needed him, because imagine if they didn't have him, That's when a player like Grady Jarrett is worth every penny and is a guy who really makes a difference. Ever since that Super Bowl in 2016 where he had 3 sacks, he's just turned it up a notch, and he's been solid for the Falcons year in and year out. And he had a really good year this year. He had a career year, He's been good in the past, like I said, consistent. But this year he was special. He's a really good player. And I think 91's too low. I got to go for him maybe 70s, 60s, I think is where he should be. In the 80s, I think that's a little bit more justified. But 91, there's 90 players better than him. Maybe in all their primes, there's 90 players better than him. But this year, as of 2019, he should be a lot higher. There's no way he's the 91st best player. That's not a bad position, I guess. There's a couple thousand players in the NFL, and you're number 91. That's awesome. But he had a really nice year, and there might be some big name guy ahead of him that really isn't as deserving of being in a higher spot than he should be. I don't even know if what I said just makes sense, but he should be higher. There might be some big name guy like Geno Atkins, who's solid and still had a solid year, but did he have a better year than Grady Jarrett? I don't know. Is he more consistent and star power type player? And in his prime, would he be better than Grady Jarrett? Maybe, but Grady Jarrett had a great year, and he's a younger guy, so he's still got a few years left to go to learn, keep learning, improve. But he's slowly really becoming a star for that Falcons defense, and they need stars because they've had some injury problems and inconsistencies. And they're going to be a different team this year. They rebranded, so we'll see how things turn out for them and Grady Jarrett. But he gets spot number 91. He's criminally underrated, but I feel like soon, if the Falcons have a good year, he's going to be a lot higher next year. And he should be anyway if he continues what he's doing. So, anyways, that's it for today's video. This was the NFL Top 100 reaction analysis, I guess you could say, from spots number 191. I guess I'm going to do 90 through 81 in the next video. So stay tuned for that. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.